Feisty C.J. Gardner Johnson gets traded.
Right now, we can't anymore.
Just 3 games into the season, the Texans cut loose their star safety, C.J. Gardner Johnson, and within hours, whispers of a trade to the Eagles surfaced. However, insiders claim that something else prompted this move, and if those rumors are true, this might be one of the darkest trades in recent NFL history. The shocking release, when championship dreams turned to nightmare. The NFL world was left stunned on September 23, 2025, when news broke that would send shockwaves through the league and leave fans scratching their heads in disbelief. The Houston Texans, a team with Super Bowl aspirations, had made the shocking decision to release veteran safety C.J. Gardner Johnson after just 3 games into the season. And not just that, he has allegedly been traded to the Philadelphia Eagles, leaving the Houston Texans after a brief and complicated tenure. This wasn't just any ordinary roster move. This was the release of a proven Super Bowl champion, a player who had been a cornerstone of championship defenses, and someone the Texans had literally just traded for and restructured his contract weeks earlier.
You came here for championships, nothing less, not about winning more AFC South titles, and I think that message was probably communicated, I would imagine.
To understand the magnitude of this decision, we need to step back and examine the journey that brought Gardner Johnson to Houston in the first place. This is a story that begins with championship glory and ends with one of the most surprising releases in recent NFL history. A tale that perfectly encapsulates the volatile nature of professional football and the delicate balance between talent and team chemistry. The foundation of this story was built on success. Gardner Johnson wasn't just any safety. He was coming off a Super Bowl licks victory with the Philadelphia Eagles, where he had been a key contributor to their championship run. His 2024 season with Philadelphia had been nothing short of spectacular, featuring 6 interceptions and 71 tackles across 17 games, helping anchor a defense that many considered elite. When you're talking about a player of Gardner Johnson's caliber, you're discussing someone who brings not just statistical production, but championship pedigree and the kind of veteran leadership that teams covet. The Texans certainly saw it that way when they made the trade to acquire him from the Eagles in March 2025. This wasn't a desperate move by a rebuilding franchise. This was a calculated decision by a team that believed they were on the cusp of something special. Houston had emerged as one of the AFC's most promising young teams, led by quarterback C.J. Stroud and a defense that had shown tremendous potential. The acquisition of Gardner Johnson was meant to be the missing piece, the veteran presence that could elevate their secondary from good to great. The trade itself told the story of how much Houston valued Gardner Johnson's services. The Texans sent guard Kenyon Green, a 2022 first-round pick, along with a 2025 fifth-round pick to Philadelphia, receiving Gardner Johnson and a 2026 sixth-round pick in return. This was significant for multiple reasons. Green had been a first-round investment just 3 years prior, and while his development had stalled, trading him away represented the Texans acknowledging that their offensive line experiment hadn't worked while simultaneously investing heavily in their defensive backfield. But the trade was just the beginning of Houston's commitment to Gardner Johnson. In what would later appear to be either supreme confidence or catastrophic miscalculation, the Texans restructured Gardner Johnson's contract in early September 2025, converting approximately $6.58 million of his base salary into a signing bonus. This move wasn't just about creating cap space. It was a signal to the league, to the locker room, and to Gardner Johnson himself that Houston viewed him as a cornerstone piece of their defensive puzzle. The restructure created approximately $5.66 million in immediate cap space, giving the Texans financial flexibility for in-season moves and demonstrating their long-term commitment to the veteran safety. It was the kind of move that typically signals stability and mutual satisfaction between player and organization. The timing made it even more significant. Restructuring a contract right before the season begins is often seen as a vote of confidence, a way of telling a player that they're not just part of the immediate plans, but part of the long-term vision. What made this restructure particularly noteworthy was the financial implications it would later have. When a team converts base salary to a signing bonus, that money becomes guaranteed and is paid upfront to the player. The cap hit gets spread out over multiple years, but the cash is immediate. This meant that Gardner Johnson would receive that $6.58 million signing bonus regardless of what happened later, a detail that would become painfully relevant just weeks later. As the season began, the expectations in Houston were sky high. The Texans weren't just hoping to make the playoffs, they had legitimate Super Bowl aspirations. Their offense, led by the sophomore sensation C.J. Stroud, had shown explosive potential. Their defense, now bolstered by the addition of Gardner Johnson, was expected expected to take a significant step forward. The pieces seemed to be in place for a special season. Gardner Johnson's arrival had been met with genuine enthusiasm from the Houston faithful. Here was a player with a proven track record of success, someone who had been a key contributor to championship teams. His reputation as a ball-hawking safety with excellent instincts preceded him, and Texans fans had every reason to believe that his presence would elevate their secondary to new heights. The early signs seemed promising enough. Gardner Johnson was immediately inserted into the starting lineup, playing alongside other key defensive pieces in what was supposed to be a formidable unit. He started all 3 games of the season, logging 96% of defensive snaps and accumulating 15 tackles in that brief span. On paper, his integration appeared to be proceeding smoothly.
I've been in games where I had to step up, so for me, championships mean more to me than just winning a football game right now. Because I think I'm getting older, playing with a lot of younger guys who understand, like, yeah, the money's here, but it's more on the end when you can win and get championships, you know?
Talking about legacy?
Yeah, you want to lead those when you talk about being a great, if that makes sense.
But beneath the surface, storm clouds were gathering. The Texans' season had gotten off to a disastrous start, with the team sitting at 0, 3 after close losses that had left both players and coaching staff searching for answers. These weren't blowout defeats that could be easily explained away. These were tight games, each decided by 7 points or fewer, the kind of losses that can be particularly frustrating because they feel so preventable. The first warning sign came in Week 1 against the Los Angeles Rams, where Houston fell 14-9 in what should have been a winnable game. Gardner Johnson's presence was supposed to help prevent the kind of defensive breakdowns that had plagued the team in previous seasons, but instead, he was responsible for allowing a 13-yard touchdown pass to tight end Davis Allen on a corner route that proved crucial in the narrow defeat. Week 2 brought another heartbreaking loss, this time 20-19 to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Once again, Gardner Johnson found himself at the center of a defensive breakdown, failing in his cover 2 responsibilities and allowing a 20-yard touchdown pass to receiver Ryan Miller. The pattern was becoming clear. In games where every possession mattered, the Texans' new safety acquisition was struggling with the scheme and making costly mistakes. The breaking point came in Week 3 against the Jacksonville Jaguars. In what would prove to be Gardner Johnson's final game as a Texan, he made perhaps his most costly error yet. Jumping an outbreaking route while assigned to cover the middle of the field, he allowed a 46-yard reception to Brian Thomas Jr. that set up Jacksonville's game-winning touchdown in a 17-10 defeat. It was exactly the kind of freelancing that drives coaches to distraction, abandoning assignment in pursuit of a highlight reel play, only to give up an even bigger one. These on-field struggles were compounded by what was happening behind the scenes. According to multiple league sources, Gardner Johnson was struggling to adapt to defensive coordinator DeMeco Ryans' system, which emphasized communication and disciplined coverage over the kind of aggressive, instinct-based play that had made him successful elsewhere. The philosophical clash between player and system was becoming increasingly apparent. Gardner Johnson had built his reputation on being a versatile defensive back, capable of playing multiple positions and making game-changing plays through aggressive coverage and well-timed blitzes. But Ryan's scheme required something different. It demanded players who could execute specific assignments within a structured framework, prioritizing communication and collective success over individual highlight plays. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who understood the situation. Here was a player who had been instrumental in championship runs, someone with proven ability to perform on the biggest stages, struggling to find his footing in a system that should have maximized his talents. It spoke to the complex chemistry required for NFL success, how even the most talented players can struggle when placed in schemes or cultures that don't align with their natural strengths and tendencies. As September wore on, the tensions were building toward an inevitable confrontation. The Texans' 0-3 start had everyone on edge, from the front office to the coaching staff to the players themselves. In such an environment, every mistake gets magnified. Every personality clash becomes more significant, and the pressure to find solutions, or scapegoats, intensifies dramatically. What nobody could have predicted was how quickly and dramatically the situation would deteriorate. The same organization that had just guaranteed Gardner Johnson millions of dollars and publicly committed to him as a cornerstone. Peace was about to make one of the most shocking roster moves of the entire NFL season. Behind the scenes, the friction that broke the camel's back. While the on-field struggles provided the visible symptoms of Gardner Johnson's troubled tenure in Houston, it was the behind-the-scenes friction that ultimately sealed his fate. What unfolded in the Texans facility over those 3 weeks in September reads like a masterclass in how quickly professional relationships can deteriorate when personalities, schemes, and expectations collide in the worst possible ways. The first signs of trouble weren't immediately apparent to the outside world, but insiders were beginning to pick up on the growing tension between Gardner Johnson and the organization. organization. Aaron Wilson of KPRC2, one of Houston's most connected NFL reporters, would later detail how the situation had been building for weeks, describing it as friction behind the scenes that involved multiple layers of discontent and miscommunication. At the heart of the conflict was Gardner Johnson's fundamental dissatisfaction with how he was being utilized within DeMeco Ryans' defensive scheme. The veteran safety had built his reputation on being an aggressive, versatile defender who could impact games through well-timed blitzes and aggressive coverage. His most successful seasons had come when he was given the freedom to make plays based on his instincts and experience. But the Texans' system was asking him to operate within much tighter parameters. Sources indicated that Gardner Johnson was particularly vocal about wanting to blitz more frequently, feeling that his pass rushing abilities were being underutilized in a scheme that prioritized coverage responsibilities over aggressive pressure packages. This wasn't just a minor preference. It represented a fundamental philosophical disagreement about how his talents should be deployed. The numbers tell a revealing story about this disconnect. During his successful stints with previous teams, particularly with the Eagles and Saints, Gardner Johnson had been utilized in a variety of roles that maximized his aggressive instincts. Since leaving the New Orleans Saints, Gardner Johnson had not been asked to rush the passer nearly as much as he had been when he was with the black and gold, and this reduction in pass rushing opportunities had been a source of frustration throughout his career moves. But the role complaints were just the beginning. According to league sources, Gardner Johnson's frustration extended beyond his own usage to criticism of his teammates in the secondary. Reports indicated that he was critical of teammates in the secondary and didn't like his role, creating an atmosphere of tension that began to affect the entire defensive unit. This criticism reportedly extended to sensitive areas like contract discussions and playing time allocations. In a locker room filled with young players still establishing themselves, having a veteran openly question decisions and compare situations to his previous, more successful stops was creating exactly the kind of division that championship teams cannot afford. The psychological impact on a struggling team cannot be overstated. When veteran leaders become sources of criticism rather than support, it can devastate team morale. The situation was made even more complex by Gardner Johnson's legitimate credentials and recent success. This wasn't a washed-up veteran offering empty complaints. This was someone who had literally just won a Super Bowl and had the rings to prove his methods worked.
I got 3 more championships in me. I'm gonna be honest with you, I got 3 more. I'm probably gonna win the next 3 years. That's how I'm feeling.
This confidence, while perhaps justified by his track record, was apparently clashing with the Texans' culture in problematic ways. Gardner Johnson's approach of using his championship pedigree as leverage in discussions about scheme and personnel was backfiring in an environment where the coaching staff was trying to establish their own identity and systems. The breaking point came when Gardner Johnson took the unprecedented step of requesting a trade. Multiple sources confirmed that Gardner Johnson explicitly requested a trade from the Texans before his release, a move that essentially forced the organization's hand. When a player formally requests a trade, especially one who was recently acquired and had his contract restructured, it sends a clear message that the relationship is beyond repair.
It wasn't about money.
Yep.
It wasn't about money.
Yep.
It wasn't about money. If it was about money, then everybody would be gone.
The trade request represented the ultimate escalation of tensions that had been building since the season began. It wasn't just about scheme fit anymore. It was about fundamental compatibility between player and organization. Gardner Johnson was essentially telling the Texans that he didn't believe the marriage could work and wanted out, despite the significant financial commitment both sides had just made to each other. From the team's perspective, this request created an impossible situation. Head coach DeMeco Ryans had built his reputation on establishing strong team culture and accountability, and allowing a player to dictate terms through trade requests would have set a dangerous precedent. At the same time, keeping an unhappy veteran who was publicly expressing dissatisfaction wasn't a viable long-term solution. He himself acknowledged the unique challenge of joining a team with no deep postseason tradition.
So me, I had to step back and I had to humble up because now I'm at the bottom of the mountain with a team that never to the top.
The communication breakdown extended beyond just philosophical differences about defensive schemes. Reports indicated that Gardner Johnson had struggled with basic communication and coverage assignments, issues that were showing up not just in games, but during practice sessions and walkthroughs. When a veteran player is making mistakes in controlled environments like walkthroughs, it suggests deeper adaptation problems that go beyond simple learning curve issues. These struggles were particularly problematic because they were affecting other players. In a secondary that relies heavily on communication and coordination, having one player consistently out of position or making incorrect reads can compromise the entire unit's effectiveness. The Texans had allowed opponents to complete passes at a high rate, and Gardner Johnson's coverage mistakes were directly contributing to opponent scaring drives.
Scared of a competitor.
You said they're scared of a competitor?
Yeah, simple as that.
What you mean?
You can't program a dog. Certain dogs, you can't say be a dog and then it's time to go out there.
This quote from a later interview provides insight into Gardner Johnson's mindset and how he viewed his treatment by teams. His self-perception as an uncontrollable competitor who couldn't be programmed was part of what made him effective, but it was also what made him difficult to integrate into structured systems that required precise execution and discipline. The situation was further complicated by Gardner Johnson's history of similar issues with previous teams. His career path: Saints 2019 to 2021, Eagles 2022, Lions 2023, Eagles again 2024, and now Texans, showed a pattern of short tenures that suggested recurring challenges with organizational fit. Each move had been explained by different factors: contract disputes, injuries, scheme changes. But the common thread was Gardner Johnson's difficulty in finding long-term stability. The pattern of finger-pointing instead of taking responsibility was particularly damaging to team chemistry. In professional sports, accountability is crucial for maintaining locker room harmony. When mistakes happen, and they inevitably do, how players and coaches respond to those mistakes often determines whether they become learning opportunities or sources of division. Gardner Johnson's refusal to accept responsibility for coverage breakdowns, combined with his tendency to deflect blame onto teammates or scheme limitations, was creating exactly the kind of toxic environment that championship teams cannot tolerate. The Texans' young secondary needed veteran leadership and guidance, not criticism and excuse-making. The timeline of events shows how quickly the situation deteriorated. The contract restructure in early September had been intended to demonstrate mutual commitment and create financial flexibility for both sides. But within weeks, that same restructured contract was becoming a source of dead money as the organization prepared to cut ties entirely. The financial implications of the decision were staggering. The Texans would absorb approximately $9.08 million in dead cap space for 2025 alone, with additional dead money implications extending into future years. This wasn't a decision made lightly. Organizations don't willingly absorb this kind of financial penalty unless the alternative is seen as even more damaging to their prospects. The final straw appears to have been the combination of on-field struggles and off-field disruption reaching a tipping point during the team's 0-3 start. With each passing week, the problems were getting worse rather than better, and the coaching staff was facing a critical decision. Continue trying to make the relationship work while the team's season slipped away, or cut losses and move forward with players who bought into their system. The Eagles reunion question and what's next. The moment news broke of Gardner Johnson's release from Houston, one question dominated social media feeds, sports talk radio, and NFL insider discussions. Could he return to Philadelphia? The possibility of a reunion with the Eagles seemed almost poetic. A Super Bowl champion returning to the franchise where he had achieved his greatest success, potentially providing the final piece for another championship run. But as with most things in the NFL, the reality was far more complicated than the romantic narrative suggested. The natural appeal of an Eagles reunion was undeniable. Gardner Johnson had been instrumental in Philadelphia's Super Bowl Licks victory, recording 6 interceptions during the 2024 season and playing a crucial role in their championship defense. His chemistry with the organization, his understanding of their system, and his proven ability to perform at the highest level in their uniform made him an obvious candidate for consideration. Eagles fans certainly thought so. Social media exploded with speculation and hope as news of the release spread. The timing seemed perfect. Philadelphia was in the middle of another strong season. Their secondary could always use depth, and Gardner Johnson was immediately available without any trade compensation required. It seemed like the stars were aligning for a fairy tale reunion. But the NFL's rulebook had other plans. The league's constitution and bylaws contained specific provisions designed to prevent teams from manipulating the trade and release system, and these rules would prove to be a significant obstacle to any potential Eagles reunion. Article 17, Section 17.4c of the NFL Constitution and bylaws stipulates that if a traded player is released after participating in fewer than 4 regular season games with the acquiring team, the original team cannot reacquire him for 2 full seasons. The rule exists for good reason. It prevents sham trades where teams might temporarily move a player to create cap space or roster flexibility, only to bring him back after a brief period elsewhere. Since Gardner Johnson played only 3 games with Houston, falling short of the 4-game threshold, the Eagles are prohibited from re-signing him until the restriction expires. This rule application effectively closed the door on what many considered the most most logical landing spot for Gardner Johnson. Multiple sources confirmed that the Eagles cannot reacquire Gardner Johnson due to these NFL bylaws, meaning that Philadelphia fans would have to look elsewhere for secondary reinforcements, and Gardner Johnson would need to find a new home. The financial reality of Gardner Johnson's situation also created interesting dynamics in the free agent market. Because of the contract restructure he received in Houston, Gardner Johnson retained the $6.58 million signing bonus that was converted from his base salary. This meant that any team signing him would only need to pay him the veteran minimum for the remainder of the season, making him an extremely affordable addition for any organization looking to add proven talent. This financial structure made Gardner Johnson one of the most attractive free agents available, combining elite talent with minimal cost. For teams operating with tight cap constraints, the opportunity to add a super dub, bowl-winning safety for essentially the league minimum represented exceptional value. The question wasn't whether teams would be interested, it was which teams would be willing to take on the personality and chemistry risks that came with his undeniable talent. Several franchises emerged as logical landing spots based on need, scheme fit, and organizational culture. The New York Jets, with their defensive coordinator Aaron Glenn having previous experience coaching Gardner Johnson in Detroit, represented an intriguing possibility. Glenn understood both Gardner Johnson's strengths and his challenges, potentially providing the kind of coaching relationship that could maximize his effectiveness while managing his tendencies toward disruption. The Detroit Lions also represented a compelling option, given Gardner Johnson's previous stint there and his familiarity with their defensive system. Despite his brief and injury-plagued tenure in Detroit, his relationship with the organization remained relatively positive, and they possessed the kind of veteran leadership and established culture that might better accommodate his strong personality. Championship contenders like the Kansas City Chiefs emerged as dark horse candidates, with the team potentially viewing Gardner Johnson as a playoff rental who could provide valuable depth and experience during a postseason run. Andy Reid's comments about needing more team energy suggested that Gardner Johnson's intensity might be welcomed in Kansas City, where his competitive fire could be channeled toward championship goals. But potential landing spots were only part of the equation. The bigger question was whether Gardner Johnson could learn from his Houston experience and find ways to better integrate with new organizations. His pattern of short tenures with multiple teams suggested recurring challenges that went beyond simple scheme fit or bad luck.
You just win here. Just keep winning. Just keep winning and don't take away from what's already there. I think that's the biggest thing. Just keep winning. I think when you talk about football and your career, it's winning football games. You can't talk about losing.
This quote reveals Gardner Johnson's mindset about success and his belief that winning solves all problems. While there's truth to this philosophy, his Houston experience demonstrated that winning requires more than individual talent. It requires buying into team systems and maintaining positive relationships with coaches and teammates. The broader NFL community was watching Gardner Johnson's situation with interest because it represented several important themes that extend beyond one player's career. The balance between individual talent and team chemistry is a constant challenge for NFL organizations. How much disruption is worth tolerating in exchange for elite production? At what point does a player's personality become more of a liability than their talent is an asset? Gardner Johnson's case was particularly interesting because his disruption wasn't coming from off-field issues or character problems in the traditional sense. He had no major legal troubles or substance abuse issues, and his work ethic wasn't generally questioned. His challenges stemmed from his strong personality, his specific preferences about how to play his position, and his tendency to voice those preferences in ways that created friction with coaches and teammates. For Gardner Johnson personally, his Houston experience provided valuable lessons about adaptation and integration. At 27 years old, he was entering what should be the prime years of his career, with enough experience to understand team dynamics, but still young enough to modify his approach. The question was whether he could evolve his leadership style to become more collaborative while maintaining the competitive fire that made him effective. His track record of production remained impressive: 18 career interceptions, multiple Pro Bowl appearances, and Super Bowl success, suggesting that his talent level wasn't the issue. The challenge was finding an organization that could provide the right combination of scheme fit, veteran leadership, and cultural flexibility to help him succeed. The timing of his release also created interesting strategic considerations for potential suitors. As a vested veteran, Gardner Johnson bypassed waivers and became an immediate unrestricted free agent, allowing any team to sign him without compensation to Houston. This meant that teams didn't need to worry about trading assets or waiver priority. They could simply make their pitch and see if they could convince him to join their organization. The financial incentives were also aligned for both sides. Teams could add proven talent at minimal cost, while Gardner Johnson could focus on finding the right organizational fit rather than chasing the highest contract offer. This dynamic created the possibility for strategic matchmaking between player needs and team requirements. Industry observers were particularly interested in how Gardner Johnson's situation would be resolved because it could set precedents for how similar personality-driven roster moves would be handled in the future. If he successfully landed with a contender and contributed to a championship run, it would validate the idea that talented players deserve multiple opportunities to find the right organizational fit. If he continued to struggle with integration issues, it might signal that some personality types are simply too disruptive for modern NFL environments. Statistical analysis showed that approximately 80 to 90% of players in similar situations find new teams within a month of their release, suggesting that Gardner Johnson's talent level would ultimately create opportunities despite his reputation for being difficult to manage. The key would be finding the right match between his specific needs and an organization's ability to accommodate his unique characteristics while channeling them toward team success. Click on one of the cards on your screen to see more videos like this.